This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. The Nigel Farage Show.
Nicola says on Twitter, a rare outbreak of grown-up debate on LBC between Alistair Campbell and Nigel Farage. Restraint on all sides. More, please. Thank you, Nicola. Well, you know, it is Sunday morning, and actually, when I did a television thing with Alistair Campbell a few months ago, and we sort of finished up screaming at each other, it's quite fun to be cut and clipped and put out on Twitter and Facebook and everything else, but you don't get very far. I hope you felt that debate was worthwhile. I still find it very difficult when I talk to people who are as pro-Remain as Alistair, and indeed Nick Clegg going back 2 or 3 years, and you say to them, but do you really want to be signed up to this intensely political project that wants to drag us into its army and ultimately its currency and everything else? And they still seem to think that the Brits can have it both ways. And I honestly and truthfully do not believe that that is an honest position anymore. I think the mood of the European Union post-Brexit has changed. They are trying to complete the political project before others follow Britain's example. And my goodness me, you have got some rebellions going on out there. Poland having its voting rights suspended. Hungary being treated as a pariah. And in Catalonia, a majority, albeit slim, but a majority in those recent elections voting for parties that want Catalonia to succeed from Spain, knowing that means the European Union wouldn't have them. So there is massive protest out there. I'm fearful of a second referendum, and that's partly, of course, because of my experience of working within the European project. You know, we saw Denmark reject a treaty and be forced to vote again. We saw the Irish twice in the last 17 years vote against European treaties and forced to vote again. So I am worried. I'm worried that Parliament, in the face of what they see as a bad deal, will force a constitutional crisis upon us, and that could lead to a second referendum. I'm really giving a wake-up call to the Leave side. We need to get active. We need to start making the arguments. We should be pressuring Labour MPs, particularly in seats where a majority of the people voted Leave. We should be pressuring the government on issues like fisheries, on issues like immigration, which clearly to date have barely even been discussed. That's my view. Please challenge me. Tell me I'm wrong to think those things. Call 0345 6060 973. Text to 84850. Tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. Watch us on Facebook. And of course, you can comment there too. Now, in this hour, we're going to have Lord Adonis come in. And Lord Adonis appears to have been given a completely new lease of life by the Remain argument. He is active everywhere. Alistair Campbell said he's on fire, and we had a bit of an exchange earlier this week, and we'll find out from Lord Adonis what his take on this is. But for now, it's you and me. It's Femi in Shoreditch. Good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. How you doing?
Good morning. I'm fine, thank you very much indeed, sir. Am I wrong to think that a second referendum is not desirable but possible, and that Leavers should get prepared?
Well, from everything I've heard, most Brexit voters aren't particularly happy with the way negotiations are going. They don't like the bill, they don't like the transition period, so I think even most Brexiters would think that it's their right to be able to review the deal. I mean, it's the will of the people. If the will of the people says that the negotiations are going to leave Britain in a worse position, then saying that they shouldn't have a say doesn't really make sense. And I was actually calling in relation to something you said earlier. You said how you were saying how your fear of a EU army was one of the reasons why you said we needed to have Brexit. What's exactly the reasoning behind that? Because defence policy requires unanimity, so they can't force us into an EU army. They can form one by themselves.
Okay. No, fine, understood. In his State of the Union speech, Mr. Juncker couldn't have been clearer. You know, we know that the European Union has had an emerging foreign policy over the course of the last few years. One of the constraints upon Brussels and the Commission in particular in doing what it would like to do with foreign policy, much of which, Femi, of course, includes expansion, which to the east, which I find very worrying in the case of Ukraine and others. But one of the reasons that's really inhibited them, as you quite rightly say, is that any country at the moment can veto a foreign policy idea for the European Union. What Juncker said in that speech clearly, and to a standing ovation in the European Parliament from political groups from right, centre and left, is that we will get rid of the veto on foreign policy, giving the European Union freedom to act. Now, Femi, I put this to you, that if you have a European Union that is expansionist, if you have a European Union whose foreign policy is no longer constrained in the same way by veto, and you have a European army, I find that a pretty worrying cocktail.
But here's the thing, though. The removal of veto would mean a transfer of powers from the state level to the EU level. That is the separation of powers in terms of who controls what. That's outlined in the treaties. In order to change that, you would need a unanimous change, a unanimous decision to change the treaty.
Yes.
So they literally can't remove our veto because we can veto the removal of vetoes.
Well,
so saying so in order for that to happen, we would have to agree. As a country, we have the sovereign right to agree whether or not they take away our power of veto. So saying, let's Brexit because we might have a EU army, let's Brexit because they might remove our vetoes, these are all things we have complete control over.
The trouble is, Femi, you can't, as a member of a club, veto everything. You know, there is always an element of horse trading that goes on. You can't just sit there and say no to everything. You can say no to some things, but not to everything. Femi, with or without us, would you agree with me that it is becoming, and they want it to be, an increasingly militarised European Union?
There are elements within the EU. For example, Juncker, who you keep mentioning,
he's the boss.
He's the boss. Yeah. Until 2019, something else happens that year. I forget what that is. Brexit. The year we leave to avoid people like Juncker is the year Juncker himself leaves, because commissioners have a 5-year term, after which they're chosen by the head of state that we elect.
Do you know, Femi, who the bookie's favourite is to succeed Juncker?
No, tell me.
It's Barnier. Barnier sees himself as the next big boss. Femi, I thank you for your points and for your call. Richard is calling from Manningtree. Good morning, Richard.
Oh, good morning, Nigel. Thank you very much for having the chance to call.
Not a bit.
My question would have been to Alistair Campbell. Irrespective of which way a person leans, whether you are on the Remain side or the Leave side, would he have not agreed that we are now at the point of no return, actually, because if we were to stay, would we not be expected to bow down to everything? I think we would be treated more harshly than we have been up to now, and that's been pretty bad.
Are we past the point of no return? Well, we have, of course, triggered Article 50, and that should mean that in 2 years' time, or sooner, we simply leave. So in that point, you'd have thought we're past the point of no return, Richard. The trouble is, there are plenty of very clever legal opinions. There were some being expressed on LBC yesterday morning. There are plenty of clever legal opinions that say, no. Article 50 can be revoked. The date can be extended. The whole thing can be abolished. Richard, I have no doubt you're right that if we as a nation were seen to be crawling back to the European Parliament and Commission, we would be treated pretty badly. Actually, we're being treated pretty badly in terms of the terms of our leaving. But folks, that is not because of Brexit. That is because of the government's interpretation of Brexit. It's the way they're doing Brexit. And I sometimes don't think, Richard, that the government in these negotiations recognise what a strong hand we've got.
Yes, it's a mystery to me as well, because I think we've got all the aces and we just haven't played them. I just don't understand it.
Well, Richard, my view, and again, anyone challenge me, tell me I'm wrong, I think that Brexit is a very big political task, and I don't see how a Prime Minister can take us through Brexit unless she believes in it herself. And when Ian Dale asks her, how would you vote if there was a referendum tomorrow? Answer, there comes none. Richard, I thank you. Alfred is calling from East Ham. Good morning, Alfred.
Nigel, hello there. When I hear Campbell saying, when you were putting the grand projet of the European Union, with their all-encompassing hegemony, and say, oh no, I think we can. We needn't be part of that. We could negotiate. I mean, look, if if people didn't take the lesson from Greece about how amenable these people were to negotiation, I don't know what. They've practically flushed the country down the toilet for the sake of sending a message. I mean, when you listen to what Varoufakis was talking about, how he went into negotiations,
I know.
and it was like a protection racket, besuited and briefcased. But look, what I think I said to him, what's your GDP? We command a GDP of so and so. Yeah, my GDP's bigger than yours.
Oh well, a bit like Trump's button, eh? Alfred, frankly, my view from the start is that ever since Article 50 was triggered, Barnier and his friends at the European Commission have treated the United Kingdom like a hostage. As if we're being held by them, and we've got to pay some huge ransom, a 40 billion ransom, to get out. And we're no one's hostage. We're a free country. We're free to do as we wish, and that includes walking away with no deal. And this concept, Alfred, that we currently have free trade with the European Union, it's not free. It's been costing £10 billion every year. And my sense, from what I saw with Mr. Barnier last week, is that if there was to be a deal for goods and services, that would involve us going on paying large sums of money and accepting, I think, the free movement of people too. Alfred, you make a great point. You're all making great points this morning. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's now 11:15. Monsieur Barnier left me very pessimistic about the deal we're going to get, and in turn, I'm worried that Parliament will veto virtually whatever deal is put in front of them, leading to a constitutional crisis. I fear a second referendum. I am trying my utmost to rally the Leave side, to say, come out of hibernation and let's get out there and campaign again. And we've had Alistair Campbell in, who took a lot of your calls, and we will, at the bottom of the hour, have Lord Adonis joining us, and he and I will have a chat, and equally, he is also prepared to take some of your calls. So Lord Adonis here in just over 10 minutes, but for now, quite a lot of complimentary stuff. For once, a sensible debate from Nigel and Alistair. And I think what she's referring to is the GMTV debate between Campbell and I, which was chaired by Piers Morgan, which did develop, Good Morning Britain, which did develop into a bit of a slanging match, but not today. Nigel is my next caller from Camden. Good morning, Nigel.
Yeah, hello, Nigel. How are you?
Good morning. Very well. What did you make of Alistair Campbell's comments today?
Campbell's kind of sitting on the fence like all the Remainers are. And I think that you're playing a little bit of a funny game with the Remainers as well. You're saying that they're really organised and the Leavers need to get organised. I think that the Remainers are in total disarray, and I think that you really know that. And what the Remainers really need to do is actually cease being Remainers, and they need to become integrators. So that the argument should be, does Britain stay out of Europe totally, or does Britain go into Europe totally? Because this compromise deal that the Remainers are kind of arguing for at the moment is going to end up failing totally.
Yes, I agree with that. And as I say, when Nick Clegg says I'm a dangerous fantasist, there won't be a European army, and now we're told it'll be completed by 2025, you do see the weakness of that case. Nigel, there does seem to be a real reluctance for anybody on the Remain side to really come clean about what Europe is. It is about the creation of a new state. Do you know Barnier, Nigel? Barnier said to me on Monday, we were talking about this. Barnier said to me on Monday, he said, we are not building a federal Europe. We are building a unified Europe. And that actually is scarier, because a federal Europe would mean that the individual states would have, rather like America perhaps, would have quite a lot of say, quite a lot of power over their own lives. The idea of a unified unitary state, I think it's one that if the British people really understood it, they would reject heavily.
Well, that would be up for them to reject.
Of course.
The truth is, that's absolutely what Europe needs. You've got your America, you've got your Trump-Putin nexus developing. A lot of people in Europe, the older generation that you point out are pro-Europe, they've lived with a divided Europe. They've lived with a lot of that Europe in the Soviet Union. And now we've got the younger generation highly exposed to Facebook, which I've been watching you on just now, and other social media, and the Russians are extremely effective at manipulating that, and you'll need a few percentage points and a bit of a manipulation, as you have seen in the United States, where 126 million Facebook users were exposed to Russian propaganda during their general election.
Well, I think, Nigel, if you look at the actual sums of money that were alleged to be spent by the Russians in America, they were tiddly. But that's by the way. Do you think, Nigel, that a fully unified United States of Europe can work as a political concept?
Yes, I do. It'll take time. Obviously, all these things, they take time. But ultimately, it has to be a unified Europe. It has to be a unified Europe because we have now big unified countries. China is on the global scene in a huge degree. Russia is not going to go away. The United States is huge. But Europe has to be a massive...
But, Nigel, haven't we proved, Nigel, through NATO... Haven't we proved through NATO that actually countries cooperating together can still be hugely effective on the world stage?
No, I don't think so, actually. I think NATO at the moment is being destabilised by Trump. The last thing you want. Europe has got to stand together on its own and not be dependent on the United States.
I tell you what
might happen there.
I tell you what, Nigel, I disagree with you, and I didn't just want the United Kingdom to leave the European Union. I want Europe to leave the European Union. I think this project's now a force for bad, not a force for good. I believe in European nation-state democracy, cooperating very closely together. Would you agree with me that before the European Union makes these further fundamental moves towards that unitary state, would you agree with me that to do so without having the consent of the people in referendums in all the countries would be a mistake?
Now, just where you're going with this, okay? You're actually anti-Europe. No. I'm anti this undemocratic political project called the European Union. Well, listen, take your Brexit, get Britain out of Europe, that's fine, and then let Europe get on with being Europe. You are therefore no longer any part of that. Do Europe that favour. Get out and stay out.
I think you're in for a very, very big shock, Nigel, over the course of the coming years. I think there are some giant forces out there. I think 2016 was a big pivot year where the nation-state made a comeback, but you've got a very strong, passionate point of view that we've heard there from Nigel in Camden, and I thank you for putting it. I'm going to go to Chris in Rickmansworth. Chris, good morning.
Morning, Nigel. Great to talk to you. Nigel, I think the likelihood of a second referendum is incredibly strong now, particularly since yourself went on a certain TV programme in the week and said, yeah, I think it's incredibly likely. I think that's a red flag to the board of the likes of Tony Blair. Oh, now Farage has said it, we can try and look at a way of dealing with this. And I think that's been the plan all along. And I'm sorry to say, Nigel, I've always been a big fan of yours, but my relationship with you now is a bit of a love-hate one because, in my opinion, I think you went too soon from UKIP. Now, I appreciate at the time you said you want your life back, etc., etc., but surely another couple of years, bearing in mind how long you've been arguing the case to leave the EU. I mean, you were back in the 90s, you were pretty much the sole voice saying, look, I want to get us out of this union. And then UKIP's now become redundant. I don't even know the guy's name that's taken over the party.
Henry Bolton is his name.
Thank you very much. I very rarely see him kind of getting on the platform and sending out the UKIP message that you certainly did. And the only person, apart from yourself, and I know you're still around, obviously, but the only other person really that has a little bit of political muscle, but nowhere near what you had, is Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Well, Chris, you know, UKIP and I had run our course, all right? You know, we'd won a dramatic referendum. UKIP and I had run our course, and it was the right time to get out. Of that, I have no doubt at all. You can't stay on, particularly being in the sort of public spotlight. You can't stay on in a job that you don't want to do. You've got to absolutely want to do it with your heart and soul, and I didn't. But Chris, what I am trying to do, and the reason for raising this potential threat of Parliament rejecting the Barnier deal and the possibility, probability, of a second referendum, what I'm trying to do, Chris, is to rally the Leave side, people across the political spectrum and people in business. And I do think that if Leave starts to make the arguments, if we start to pressure Labour MPs in Leave constituencies, if we start to pressure the government a little bit more, if we start to have campaigns on behalf of our fishing industry and so on, Chris, we can win the argument. Do you know, I remember when Alistair Campbell, who kind of today tried to distance himself from the euro, didn't he? Oh, that was all Tony Blair, not me. OK. But I remember 20 years ago, Chris, thinking we would join the euro because there was no proper organised campaign against it. And then along came an outfit called Business for Britain and one or two others, and there was a really coherent, concerted voice telling us why joining the euro was the wrong thing, and they won the day. And Chris, let's put it like this. If the Leave side gets itself organised, starts campaigning again, we will make that second referendum less likely. And that really is my motivation this week.
If I could just respond. I mean, I obviously don't know the full circumstance behind your reasons for wanting to leave UKIP. And although I respect what you've said, I still disagree. I think, bearing in mind the actual political it made a massive earthquake across the country politically. And as I said to you earlier, you were the one who really pretty much got this referendum for the country in the first place. I would have thought that you would have secretly thought, well, OK, I do want to leave this job, but I'm going to put the effort in for another couple of years. Let's get David Davis and all these other idiots to actually go and do their job. Actually, then because let's put it this way, we all know that every political party in Westminster, all they're really worried about is trying to win the next election and who might dilute their vote. I don't see. I mean, I was a Labour voter before UKIP sort of took the stage. So people that say that UKIP dilute the Tory vote, I disagree. I think it's a bit of a mixed bag. But absolutely, Chris. That was something that the press in Britain misunderstood completely. They thought all Eurosceptics were Tory, retired half-colonels living in Wiltshire, and that's where the UKIP vote came from. They didn't even see what we were doing to the Labour vote in South Wales, the Midlands and the North. And actually, do you know something, Chris? There is no doubt in my mind that in 2015 there would not have been a Tory majority had it not been for the UKIP vote. We hit Labour in that election far more than we hit the Conservatives. I totally agree with you. But this is what I was trying to say, Nigel. If you... Again, I appreciate you've got a personal life. I appreciate you're just a human being at the end of the day. But I personally think, and I know a lot of former UKIP, I mean, I've moved away from vote. I mean, I had to vote Tory at the last election. It killed me, but I had to put...
As an ex-Labour man, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, but as I said to you, and I'll just make the point one more time, I think you went too soon. I respect your decision. I respect what you've said this morning.
Yeah, Chris, my relationship with the UKIP NEC had run its course. We'd won a referendum. But I haven't gone away, Chris. I shall be this week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, in the European Parliament in Strasbourg. I'm still active in politics. I'm also very active here on LBC, which I'm thoroughly enjoying. And I hope all of you are too. So, after the break, Lord Adonis here in the studio. I'm going to have a chat with him. You can then directly put your questions to him. Lord Adonis, now one of the most prominent voices of the Remain campaign, the man who said himself on the Ian Dale show he wants to sabotage Brexit. 0345 6060 973 to call him, 84850 to text him, and using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, you can ask him questions too. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage show, exclusively on LBC. It's 11:30. Well, it's Brexit morning absolutely everywhere. Every radio show, every television show is doing the Brexit debate this morning. The big difference with this show on LBC is this is the only one where you, the public, get to ask your questions. And indeed, you were peppering Alistair Campbell with them earlier. And quite a lot of them were about the Labour Party and its position. The manifesto in the last election saying we're leaving, we're taking back borders, and Alistair saying, well, we can be a bit flexible with that. Well, Jeremy Corbyn himself has been out there doing the rounds this morning, and he appeared on Peston on Sunday. He insisted that his party is not supporting or calling for a second referendum. However, pressed on whether his party could support a second referendum in the future, he declined to say. We are not supporting or calling for a second referendum. What we've called for is a meaningful vote in Parliament. asked whether he was ruling out a second referendum in the future, Mr Corbyn said, "We are not calling for one either." I mean, joining me now is Lord Andrew Adonis. I'm going to call you a fanatical Remainer.
Well, you called me a weasel earlier in the week, Nigel.
And we're going to examine why. No, we're going to examine why.
But I take that as a high badge of honour. I hope you're going to do something else this morning, because I need something else to put on my Twitter.
I did notice that. Well, it is, of course, a wonderfully British sense of humour that when somebody abuses you, you pick it up and wear it as a badge of honour. And I do understand that. And years ago, when asked about UKIP, the Tory leader Michael Howard said they were a bunch of cranks and gadflies, and I've actually got a gadfly tie now.
I thought fruitcake, wasn't that what David Cameron called you?
Fruitcake was another one.
That's what made you from that moment.
You know, it didn't do any harm.
I've just come on to flatter you because I don't want to boost your following.
No.
The other thing I've come on to do, Nigel, I'm very, very anxious that you have the courage of your convictions, because I'm worried that you're slipping back. Earlier on in the week, you said you thought that another referendum was inevitable or likely. Then I think what happened is the number 10 people got to you, and they told you this was off message, and you couldn't do it. And you then said it was only fanatics like me that wanted the referendum. Well, Nigel, please go back to your position earlier in the week. The British people need to have a say on this treaty before it comes into effect.
We shouldn't even be having this conversation. As a proper democracy, we should be getting on with Brexit. That should be the end of it. However, the establishment, and very much hand in glove with the big multinationals and big businesses, and they're powerful. You know,
but Nigel,
they're powerful, and I've seen them. I've seen them again and again and again. We'll come to that. We'll come to that little joke too.
You run the country.
But I definitely, after my meeting with Barnier, my mind changed. I was in a position of most Leavers of saying, not only do we not want a second referendum, but we're not going to have one. And I now can see that the deal that's going to be offered is likely to be rejected by the House of Commons. And I think a second referendum is now very likely, and I'm saying this as a big warning shot to all the Leavers that I think that it could happen. But can you please just tell me, what do you think of the Labour Party position on all of this?
Well, I think Labour will support a referendum. I was in the Peston studio, literally come hot foot from Peston. I came as fast as I could because I knew you wanted me on your programme, Nigel. So I did your bidding. But what was very striking about what Jeremy said was it was all in the present tense. He's not supporting a referendum now. Well, nobody thinks there's going to be a referendum now. I mean, it's still 15 months before we leave the European Union. So what I think will happen is that when we come to this so-called meaningful vote in the autumn, I think at that point there'll be huge, huge pressure on Parliament to refer that to the people, and for a very good reason, which is that the people had the first say in this whole process. They had the first say, let's be frank, in large part because that's what you wanted. You know, your party, UKIP, over many years of campaigning, got the referendum on the agenda. They had the first say, but of course they didn't know what the deal was going to be then. And my own view, and it's the view I would take in Parliament myself, is that Parliament itself cannot trump the people. We're a democracy. The people had their say at the outset, but of course the people didn't know what the deal was going to be.
But it wasn't conditional, was it?
It wasn't conditional. It should be referred to the people.
I mean, the point about the Leave vote is we voted to leave. We voted to leave political union. We voted to get back our sovereignty, control our borders. We didn't vote on whether we should have, what sort of relationship we should have with the single market. We simply voted to leave.
But that's what we'll vote on next time, Nigel. Next time we'll vote on the actual prospectus for leaving, rather than whether we think it might be a good idea with 350 million a week for the NHS on the side of a bus, which then evaporated the day after the referendum,
Which, by the way, getting back to our little spat on Monday morning on Good Morning Britain, you attributed to me, and it had nothing to do with me at any point of that campaign, all right?
See, the problem, Nigel, is that I attribute to you the whole leadership of the Leave movement, because you are. I mean, you are effectively Prime Minister of the country at the moment. So, and there's this thing called collective responsibility, Nigel. When you're running the country as you are at the moment, because you are the establishment, you do have to take responsibility for the Goves, the Johnsons, the Liam Foxes. So when they put on the side of their bus 350 million for the NHS, I'm afraid we think that you're held accountable to it, and that's why I've come on the programme here to hold you accountable.
It's all very amusing, but the idea that Theresa May is doing my bidding, I tell you what, if she was, we wouldn't have offered 40 billion to leave. I tell you what we're going to do.
Well, she doesn't do it very well. I mean, she's not.
We know that.
She doesn't she's not sufficiently close to you, Nigel.
We know that.
But I think what you should then do is dismiss her and replace her with somebody who's a more effective vehicle for your wishes.
Do you know what? I will do my very best. Now, we're being bombarded with questions. So we have the Brexit saboteur, Lord Adonis, here, ready for your questions. And the first one is coming from Shanghai. in China, and James is on the line.
I'm looking forward to the
Good
Chinese
morning,
view of the world.
Good morning, Nigel. Big fan. Lord Adonis, can't say the same thing, I'm afraid, mate.
That's right. I know I'm an interloper on this programme, but I'm taking on the establishment, so I'm doing my best.
You couldn't make it up, James, could you, really? But come on, fire your question in all the way from Shanghai.
OK, my question to Lord Adonis is this. Obviously, you think the EU is a great deal. I wholeheartedly disagree with you. And my question, therefore, is, do you actually understand how expensive sending money overseas, either via massive trade deficits or EU payments, is to the UK when you factor in monetary velocity and then magnify that by how money is created and the velocity on the created money? Do you understand that?
Well, let's be clear. Nigel and his colleagues have just agreed an exit bill from the EU that's going to cost us £39 billion. That's the latest Treasury estimate, but it could well be a lot more than that. So there's no cost-free option here, and leaving is going to be hugely expensive. I don't want to incur that exit bill. I think we're much better off as we are, because we have full membership of the single market, full membership of the customs union. That is the majority of our trade, including the countries we have trading agreements with by virtue of being in the EU, and I don't want to put that in jeopardy.
James?
We voted out all of that. And also the question was, do you understand how monetary velocity works? And do you understand how it works when it's magnified when money is created in the British banking system? Do you understand that? And do you understand the implications?
James, I think that is getting a bit too deep. Even, if we start to get involved with quantitative easing, money creation, we'll go down the wrong route. But James, you can rest assured, when you asked your question and got your answer from Andrew Adonis, that actually when you meet a true believer in the European project, it's rather like talking to a born-again Christian. You know, if you question the existence of God, they just can't have a conversation with you. James, I thank you. I'm going to squeeze one more in before the break.
Nigel, you're like talking to the atheist who there's no truth to be had whatever in divine revelation.
Do you know something? I am very pro European cooperation. I'm very pro-European trade. I'm very pro working with our next-door neighbours in a responsible, grown-up way. What I'm not pro is being part of a political union and part of a law-making structure that we, through our democratic vote, can't alter.
But the best way of getting on with our European colleagues is to do so in an integrated structure which organises it, because otherwise it's all haphazard, hit and miss, and that's been the problem which we've had in the past.
But I want us to make our own laws. The point is, I want us to make our own laws by people who are directly accountable to us. Sovereignty should be there with the people. They should make these decisions. And as you well know, once something becomes European law, there is nothing the British government, Parliament or people can do to change that law.
But Nigel, you're a member of the European Parliament.
I know.
You're there. I'm told you're actually going to turn up there this week.
Know.
You're making a special visit.
And we cannot,
so you have a say.
Propose law,
I don't have that say, unfortunately. But you have this say, Nigel. You have a vote.
Do you deny?
I'm told you don't vote very often. If you voted more, maybe you'd have more influence over these laws.
The European Union Parliament cannot propose legislation, and it cannot repeal legislation. All of that rests with the unelected European Commission, which for me is at the heart of this debate. Listen, we're going to come back to this.
I'm looking forward to
Andrew Adonis and I will debate more. You will get lots more questions. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 11:45. Well, on the Nigel Farage Show this morning, we have got the Remainers. They're out in force. We've had Alistair Campbell. We've now got Lord Andrew Adonis, and he is taking your questions and your comments. And I'm going to go to Claire in Edgware. Good morning, Claire. What would you like to ask?
Good morning, Lord Adonis. It's looking increasingly likely that we're not going to get a deal that pleases anybody, and we're heading towards a general election, and c'est la vie. But in extremis, could we accept the Theresa May deal, reject the Theresa May deal, or maintain the status quo? Because we had a Queen's Counsel on LBC earlier who said, if we decide that nothing is acceptable and we want a meaningful vote on the final deal, as you've proffered, if we decided that we didn't wish to go ahead with Brexit and we withdrew from Article 50 before the time period is up, we could actually stop the process.
Yes is the answer to that. We can stop it. We can withdraw the notice under Article 50, and then we continue as members of the European Union. And that's what Nigel and his colleagues are deeply afraid of, is that we've still got 15 months when the British people can consider the terms, and if they reach the judgment that they're not good terms and that jobs, trade are much better off by us staying in the European Union, then the act is very simple. We simply withdraw that notice under Article 50. And this notion that Mrs May is putting out, that the choice is between her deal and crashing out with no deal, is pure spin. Parliament will decide what the options are which are put to the British people, and the obvious and logical option is her deal, which is the best deal that she believes it's possible to get, on the one hand, and staying in on the other. And though I don't think Nigel and I are going to be on the same side of that referendum on the substance, we do seem to be edging crab-like towards agreeing that the British people are sovereign and that they should have the say on this, and it shouldn't just be left to MPs and peers.
I think, to be honest with you, that if Article 50 was revoked, that would be an outrage. To me, however bad the deal is, and under this Prime Minister, it's unlikely to be very good.
Yeah, we're agreed on that. We've agreed on something. The deal that Mrs May gets is not going to be a good deal.
Where we'll agree.
Yeah.
But to me, the most important thing to me is that we leave, and even if it is a rotten deal, we can sort that out at future general elections. It would still be a terrific wasted opportunity. But you mentioned Parliament. You're a member of the House of Lords. When you talked about sabotaging Brexit, did that include the way you vote as a member of the House of Lords?
I've been very, very clear. I'm a Democrat. The role of the House of Lords, in my view, is to refer this treaty, whatever it is that Mrs May negotiates, which we're agreed is going to be a bad deal, refer that to the people. I do not believe it's right for the House of Lords to try and block it. I don't think that would be appropriate because we're an unelected House. Let's
be clear, because this is not really, I mean, you know, we've heard you on everything. This has not really come out. Are you saying that as a member of the House of Lords, you would vote for a referendum on the final deal?
Yes, but I'm not going to vote to block the deal. I don't think the House of Lords constitutionally has the power to block the deal. I think the House of Commons could, because that directly represents the people, but it is absolutely appropriate, in my view, for the House of Lords to say that there should be a referendum, because our constitutional role is to safeguard democracy. That is the role of a second chamber, and there's no bigger democratic issue which the British people face now than whether we should or shouldn't crash out of the European Union.
If it came to a really big vote in the House of Lords, and the House of Lords did vote for the government deal to go to a referendum, do you understand why there is a growing tide of voices saying that actually this House of Lords is just made up of mates of Blair and Camerons, and frankly is perhaps the most London-based, the most establishment-based House of Lords we've ever had?
Nigel, can I commiserate with you on the fact that you're not a member of the House of Lords?
Well, I'm not a friend of Blair's or Cameron's, am I?
I understand that you're very keen to join. No. Now, I'm prepared to make you an offer. I will trade my peerage for your German passport, because I understand that you have one. Is this true?
No. You really don't want to believe all this fantasy stuff.
I've been reading the wrong newspapers.
Well, I tell you what.
But then you could be there yourself, and you could vote.
I think this House of Lords...
And you could then vote for the referendum.
I think this House of Lords is a joke. I think it has to go and be replaced by an elected Senate. Let's get on with the questions. We're going to Colm from Omar, who's on the line. Good morning.
How you doing?
Good morning. Put a question, please.
Well, I've a question for both of you, but I want to ask Lord Adonis. Do you think Nigel's just realised how catastrophic this is going to be for Britain and wants a new referendum?
So the question is, has Nigel realised how catastrophic this will be for Britain?
I think he's getting there. Is my reading of this conversation? But he's getting there a bit. He's getting there, realising that the British people need to have a say. Let's be frank. We know which side Nigel's going to be on when it then comes to the referendum. But we're moving towards agreement that it's the British people who are in charge, and they're the ones who should reach the judgment on whether or not Mrs May's deal goes ahead.
Well, I think, to be honest with you, that is a slight misreading of what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I have seen the dishonest establishment, and I've seen it in Denmark, I've seen it in Ireland, making people vote again, and I just don't trust this lot. And you've already heard Lord Adonis telling us that as a member of the House of Lords, he would vote for this to go to a referendum, and I'm fearful that the deal will be seen to be rotten. I think we may well face another referendum on this. I pray we don't. But the one thing I'm trying to do is to make sure that I'm ready for it when it does come. Bob is calling from Salford. Good morning, Bob.
Good morning, Nigel, Lord Adonis. First thing, I think you're 100% right, Nigel. They'll force a second referendum, even though they don't want to call it that. But the question to Lord Adonis is, if this second referendum is based on more knowledge, can you add to that knowledge and describe what you think the EEC will look like in 5 years' time?
Well, I hope that what we'll do together is build more prosperity. What I want to see is more trade, and in particular, which is why the single market's so important, I want to see Britain's hugely successful service sector, which has millions of jobs. I want to see it trading much, much more ambitiously across Europe and internationally. And that's what I'd like to see happen over the next 5 years. I don't want us wasting our time extracting ourselves in very complicated treaties from the very trading arrangements which are vital to our future prosperity.
But the question Bob's asking is, do you supply... Look, the EU's made it clear, in future, there won't be the opt-outs and exemptions that we've seen in the past. We will have to join, according to Mr Juncker, the Euro. We'll have to join the Schengen area and the European Army.
No one has said that we have to join any of these things, Nigel.
Oh,
That's a figment of your fevered imagination.
Like
that is absolutely not true.
Just like Nick Clegg in 2014, when I said there'd be a European army, he said I was a dangerous fantasist. And this is the problem. Why don't you tell the British people the truth?
We are not joining the Euro.
Why not admit to them it's a United States of Europe they're building?
Yeah, the Euro is not going to be on the ballot paper for this referendum. What's on this the ballot paper for this referendum is staying in the existing European Union, which is the single market, the customs union, safeguarding jobs, and coming back to the question, enabling us to trade more in the future.
There is no existing European Union.
Which is great for British jobs and the British people.
This idea that the European Union represents status quo is simply not the case. It is moving very quickly. Now, we've got one last question, and it's a really important one. James from Islington, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. I'd like to ask you both, actually, assuming there was to be a second referendum, which I personally don't agree with, what would the question be?
OK.
The question would be, do you support Mrs May's Brexit deal, or do you want to stay in the European Union? That will be the choice, and that is the absolutely fair and legitimate question to ask, because Mrs May will have spent 2 years negotiating on behalf of the British people for the best deal she can get in Brussels. Nigel has told us he thinks it's going to be a bad deal. I agree with him, so therefore I think the right thing for us to do is not to have any of this nonsense, to stay in, protect our jobs, and then move on to dealing with the big social problems that we face, which have been kicked into touch by this whole Brexit nonsense.
You know, the first referendum, James, was about sovereignty. The second referendum will have to be about ultimate sovereignty. To put a complex deal to a referendum which is on economics, which doesn't even include immigration, doesn't even include democracy and lawmaking, I think would perhaps be a very big mistake. Because it's very interesting, you know, when I was there with Barnier, I mentioned immigration, one of the key drivers of that vote for us to leave, and it hadn't even been discussed. They saw that as coming later. We have run out of time. I want to say big thanks to Andrew Adonis, Lord Adonis, for coming and joining us here and being a great sport and taking lots and lots of your calls.
I'm looking forward to seeing you in the House of Lords soon, Nigel.
I tell you what,
I'm sure you'll be there before long.
Given the Chums Club that it is, there's no chance of me ever being there. You've been listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'm back tomorrow night from Strasbourg at 7. Coming up at 3 this afternoon, it's Alex Salmond. But up next, it's Majid Nawaz.
You know, I did a show a long time ago saying you should be in the Lords, Nigel.
Oh, that's very sweet of you, thank you.
There's a clip on the LBC.co.uk website.
It's not going to happen in a hurry, believe me.
Coming up, record numbers of homeowners in wealthy areas of London are selling up to quit the capital as price growth slows. Are you giving up on London? Before that, the British Army yesterday defied critics of its recruitment campaign, labelled as politically correct and weak, as it released a new set of TV adverts, including one showing a Muslim soldier praying in front of his comrades. Why would you see diversity in the army as a sign of weakness and not strength? But first, the Justice Secretary is preparing to intervene to halt the release of black cab rapist John Warboys following a public outcry. Is it right for the government to intervene in parole decisions?